Hi, welcome to Women's Health. I am Jeanne Schumacher and co-founder of the Pregnancy Advantage, where we help women to get their bodies pregnant ready. Or if you're having trouble conceiving, especially before you go down that in vitro fertilization rabbit hole. My partner in crime today is Dr. Debra Shapiro. She's a board certified OBGYN, and together we created the Pregnancy Advantage. So today's topic on women's health is endometriosis. So Doc, are you ready to jump in on this?
Yes, let's talk about it. What is endometriosis? Today we're going to be talking about an issue that's very important in women's health, and I've seen quite a lot of it as an OBGYN over the years, and it's endometriosis. If you don't know what endometriosis is, it's a condition where the lining of the uterus, the glands, endometrial glands and stroma implant outside of the uterus where they should not be. They implant on top of the uterus, on the fallopian tubes, on the ovaries, in the back of the pelvis, just in the peritoneum, on the uterosacral ligaments, and they respond to hormones and they bleed every month, just like they would be bleeding and contributing to bleeding inside of your uterus. Why does this happen? We don't really entirely know, and it's probably multifactorial because there's a genetic component, certainly, but it may also be related to exposure in the womb to certain endocrine disrupting chemicals. And it may also just be develops de novo, they say, from the coelomic endothelium. So inside, when you're developing as an embryo, there may be these cells that just differentiate into these endometrial implants and then are just there. But also there's this theory that there may be some retrograde menstruation, that so you have, instead of the blood that's that should be coming from the uterus going out the cervix for your period, instead, it sort of goes out the end of the tube and ends up in the pelvis and then kind of sticks. But however it gets there, these endometrial implants bleed and then scar, and they can really, I mean, I have seen a pelvis of one woman where it just looked like someone had poured concrete in. We were doing a hysterectomy for some other reason. I had nothing to do with pelvic pain. She actually had no pain, which is one of the most amazing things about endometriosis, is the amount of endometriosis that you have, whether it's one tiny little powder burn that we see on a laparoscopy or an entirely socked in pelvis. It does not correlate with the amount of pain. So I've seen people completely debilitated with pain who have very, very minimal disease, and I've seen people with horrific disease that actually are not experiencing much pain. So there's a lot we don't understand about that. But in general, pelvic endometriosis is a very common problem among American women. It affects 1 in 10 women during their reproductive years, according to the Endometriosis Foundation of America. And the symptoms are mostly pain. Pain anytime during your cycle, not just pain with your periods, because most people get cramps. If you're ovulating, you might have cramps the first day of your period or the second day when it's the heaviest. But when people have endometriosis, they have pelvic pain that starts before they get their period, and it lasts all the way through. I mean, not many women with a normal cycle who do not have pathology will have pain that lasts all the way through to the very end of their period. But people with endometriosis have pain that starts before and goes all the way through. They might also have pain during intercourse and during bowel movements and urination, and depending on where these implants are. They might be experiencing heavy periods. Certainly they can have bleeding sometimes between periods. And it can be very debilitating. They can have fatigue and also diarrhea and bloating and constipation and a lot of low back pain too, especially if the endometrial implants are on the uterosacral ligaments, which connect the back of the uterus to the sacrum, and you'll have this back pain and intense cramping. So if you have bad endometriosis, or sometimes if you have mild endometriosis, it can lead to infertility. You can imagine the scarring, if there's scarring on the fallopian tubes, or even just we think of with endometriosis that there's a lot of bloody fluid in the back of the pelvis, or even just some bloody fluid in the back of the pelvis, and that's sort of bathing your fallopian tubes and keeping them from really being able to move well. So definitely a major cause of infertility, and it can be treated in a number of ways. And what we'd like to talk about is actually treating it with a plant-based diet, right, Jeanne?
Oh, absolutely. That is what we are all about, because the foods can influence hormone regulation without question, particularly estrogen balance. And it's not just the foods, but it's some of the chemicals like we've been talking about. We talked a lot about this in the Q&A from the Pregnancy Advantage about especially estrogen, like for example, parabens. are things or chemicals that mimic, your body thinks it's estrogen, but it's not, and it's bioaccumulative. So that can have an impact on your estrogen balance, but foods can also have an impact on this and can clearly negatively impact endometriosis. So we want to avoid or limit foods that are going to promote inflammation in our body, that are going to lead to the further, the pain or the progression of endometriosis. So some of these foods include alcohol, clearly, caffeine, sometimes gluten, sometimes you don't realize you have a gluten intolerance, dairy products, obviously, and then just basically animal products in general, okay? But in particular, it's the red meat that is the worst, But anything that's containing things like saturated or trans fat, pretty much the SAD diet. That is the standard American diet without question. So,
right. When we think about any disease state in the body, I always go back to what I think I learned initially from Brenda Davis, but there are 4 factors that really influence the disease state, and they are inflammation, oxidative stress, dysbiosis, and lipotoxicity. So, and lipotoxicity is accumulation of fat outside of where it might be, but it's really around the organs and inside. We're not talking about a little bit of fat on your belly, but basically deep visceral fat. And the problem with visceral fat is it creates these cytokines, these inflammatory markers that are going to really lead to more inflammation and more pain throughout the body. And then, just inflammation in general. And there are foods that definitely, we just talked about some foods that definitely increase inflammation in the body. And then there's oxidative stress, which is happening all the time, creating these free radicals, these molecules that are missing an electron, and they go around like a bull in a china shop, just bumping into parts of your cells, the organelles, the DNA, and they're trying to steal electrons and create. And then of course they can create more free radicals down the line, and all of these are very damaging. And you want to be eating foods that calm a free radical, that they call free radical scavengers or antioxidants, foods that they're so generous they could just donate an electron to an unhappy free radical. So, and dysbiosis, we don't really know yet what this is. Sort of the new frontier is thinking about the trillions of bacterial and viral and fungal cells that are living in our guts, and how they help us and how they can also work against us, depending on how healthy your gut microbiome is and your microbiota is. So you want a very varied microbiota, and you do that by eating a variety of whole plant foods. And you feed them with, the gut bacteria the best gut bacteria like to eat fiber. And where do you find fiber? Well, there's no fiber in animal foods whatsoever. Even I would think in the past, if I was a kid, I would think, oh, the gristle on meat, that's kind of fibrous. It's not fiber. It's not what we're talking about. We're talking about two kinds of fiber. We're talking about an insoluble fiber that might be like the white stuff around when you're eating an orange, and all this stuff that you kind of like chew and it's not really going anywhere. That's great for bulking up your stool and keeping you from having constipation. But even the better fiber is the soluble fiber. It's the fermentable fiber. This is the fiber you don't really think about as you're eating it, but this is the fiber that's in oatmeal and that's in vegetables like okra, kind of the slimy stuff too. But this is so good for your gut bacteria, because your gut bacteria eat this fiber, they munch on this fiber, and they create something called short chain fatty acids like butyrate and acetate and propionate. And these short chain fatty acids, they protect the colonocytes, the cells that line your colon. They keep those tight junctions tight so that bacteria and pieces of bacteria, lipopolysaccharides or little pieces of shit, don't get through and set off an inflammatory cascade and an autoimmune cascade. So you really want to have more of the short chain fatty acids, and you can't have more short chain fatty acids because you don't make them. Your gut bacteria make them, and they make them if you eat fiber. And you really want to feed them the fiber connected with the antioxidants and the phytonutrients that are in whole plant foods. So fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and legumes. Especially legumes have a fantastic amount of fiber, and so do whole grains. This is that kind of soluble, fermentable fiber that we really, really want.
Absolutely. And I want to throw in there that the fiber is so important in our gut biome. It's so much more important than we ever knew, because you've got like 5 pounds of this bacteria that's in your stomach or in your colon that is helping with digestion. And if you don't have fiber rich foods, they are not going to be happy. And that means you are not going to be happy as well. So one of the other things you want to make sure that you're getting a lot of is iron rich foods. And so and there's 2 different types of iron. There's heme and non-heme. And we want to get it from the plant sources, from those are much easier to absorb, easier to digest. And you're going to find them in things like dark leafy greens, broccoli greens, fortified grains, nuts, seeds, things like that. Also, just an FYI too, my mother loved cast iron pots and pans. And one of the things that most people don't understand about that is if you need to increase your iron, just by cooking in a cast iron pan, pot or pan, you can increase it. It will literally, the food that you're cooking into it will literally absorb the iron from the pot, which will help to boost your iron levels. You want to be careful though, because sometimes that can overload you if you are cooking. If your irons are normal level and you start cooking with iron, cast iron, you need to be careful about that, because especially if you're cooking things acidic, like for example, tomato sauce, that's going to be more on the acidic side. That's going to leach out a lot more of the iron than say something that's more on the alkaline side. So just to keep an eye on that. But you definitely want to make sure that you're getting iron rich foods to help combat endometriosis.
Right. And also if you're bleeding a lot. And it's just wonderful to go off of the things that you were saying too. You were talking about being happier, and we're talking a little bit about the gut microbiome. You know that 90% of your serotonin is made in your gut, 70% of your immune system is in your gut. And a large percentage of your dopamine as well, which of course is that reward center hormone. So you're going to feel better if you feed your gut microbiome the kind of food that it wants to eat. Also, in terms of feeling satiated, it's all about the fiber. It's not about protein. It's really about fiber as well. So, and yeah, 5 pounds. Isn't that amazing?
I know. I think of it like, did you ever see Men in Black?
Yeah.
When he opens up the locker in Grand Central or wherever it was, and there's this like whole little, or if you're into Dr. Seuss, Horton Hears a Who, it's that whole microbiome, and they're down there hanging out, and they, if you're not feeding them right, they're going to let you know.
Right. And it's not a question of just taking probiotics. Probiotics are these bacteria, but it's really about putting in prebiotics, right? That's what we want. We're going to give our bacteria the food that they want to eat. We don't want to just keep trying to put in bacteria. They won't last. But these bacteria are so important. And another reason that they're so important is because, I don't know if anyone knows about TMAO. TMAO is a chemical that's made by your gut microbiome if you're eating animal products. So, because they're different and they can do different things. So if you're eating animal products and you're eating things like choline and carnitine and even lecithin supplements too, these are a form of choline and carnitine from meat, choline from dairy and eggs. So they go down into your gut and they get acted on by your gut bacteria, and they're made into TMA, trimethylamine, which goes to your liver, gets oxidized to trimethylamine and oxide. And this is a very bad player to have. I mean, it's going to increase your risk of a heart attack and of stroke and of severe cancers and metabolic syndrome and diabetes. It's highly inflammatory and you don't want it. And what's interesting is if you take a vegan, someone who has the gut microbiome of a vegan, and you feed them a steak, they will not make TMAO. They will not make TMAO because they don't have the same gut bacteria. But if you keep feeding them animal products, then soon, within, I don't know, a few days probably, and certainly by a week, they will be able to make TMAO. So you want to have a healthier gut microbiome, and then you will be reducing the inflammation in your body. And then there's something else about food, and that was about flax seeds. And Dr. Greger recommends a tablespoon of ground flax every day. And the reason for that is that ground flax has a certain kind of fiber, a lignin. I know there are 2 kinds of lignins. There's a lignin IN and a lignin AN, but this is the lignin. I think it's the AN. It's not from it's not a woody stem or something from that kind of a plant, but it's a lignin, a kind of fiber that will reduce your estrogen, your hormone level. So it actually, having that ground flax is going to reduce a man's risk of prostate cancer and also help women to reduce the risk of breast cancer. And we definitely should have, and probably also of endometriosis. So I would definitely be having, and I did, I just had my oatmeal this morning and I put on my tablespoon or two of ground flax and I put some pumpkin pie spice on it. So I got my antioxidants also up that way. So I was sort of out of blueberries. But you know, cloves have an incredible amount of antioxidants. So you can always put a pinch of cloves on something and feel very virtuous that you've been adding some antioxidants to your food. So anyway, that's so, and that brings us to the next question. Oh, one more thing about iron, about heme iron versus non-heme iron. So heme iron is from animal products, and it isn't in everything, because I was looking up one day, egg whites don't have heme iron actually, but meat certainly does. And the problem with heme iron in your body is that your body can't regulate how much you absorb. So you absorb all of it. And that can be a problem because too much iron, just like a couple of other heavy metals, are associated with Alzheimer's. So whether or not you have the genetic propensity to have Alzheimer's or not, you just don't need extra iron that way, that heme iron. So non-heme iron from plants, especially from black beans, black beans are also fabulous sources of non-heme iron, then your body just takes in what it needs. So you don't have to worry about that excess. The other thing we were talking about is essential fatty acids. I mean, it's important to have a varied diet anyway. We could try to have 30 different foods every day if you can, or at least every week. But essential fatty acids are fatty acids that we have to take in from food. We don't make them ourselves. There's certain things that we can make and there's certain things that we can't make. For example, we make all the cholesterol we need. I hope people realize that. And that's why vegan diets work so great for people, because we're not taking in any excess cholesterol, because we make all the cholesterol we need. It's not the same with carnivores. They need cholesterol, but we don't. On the other hand, a carnivore, so we need vitamin C. We can't make vitamin C, but a carnivore can make vitamin C. So that's another way that you can tell what we're meant to eat. We actually have grown up with plants. Plants give us certain things. We've always been relying on plants for these, and that's why it all works so well, this symbiotic relationship that we have with plants, and we can eat them and thrive. So essential fatty acids are fatty acids that we need to get from plants. So there are two main types of essential fatty acids. There are omega-6 fatty acids and omega-3 fatty acids. Omega-6 fatty acids, that has to do where the extra carbon, I think, link is. But omega-6 fatty acids are really ubiquitous. They're everywhere. They're in nuts and seeds and in all the oils that we have. And it's not hard to get omega-6s. They are everywhere. And omega-6s are fine. They get degraded in our body. This is the linoleic acid, and linoleic acid, omega-6, gets degraded all the way down to something called arachidonic acid. Arachidonic acid is a pro-inflammatory molecule and may even be involved in some pain conditions too. So we need inflammation. Obviously, if you cut yourself, you need to have an inflammatory response. We're not really trying to reduce that. It's very important, but there needs to be a balance with anti-inflammation. So that's why we need the omega-3 fatty acids, where the alpha-linolenic acid gets degraded to something called DHA or EPA and then to DHA. And these are anti-inflammatory. Right. And we definitely need more of those, and they're harder to find. Okay, so the sources in our environment that we can put our hands on are walnuts, chia seeds, flax seeds, and hemp seeds. And the walnuts do not need to be ground because we chew them up in our mouths, but the chia seeds and the hemp seeds, to release the omega-3 fatty acids, we do need to grind them. Or you can get—
And flax.
And flax, sorry. The hemp you don't need to grind. I misspoke. Chia and flax you need to grind. That's why I put ground flax on my cereal this morning. The hemp, I believe you don't need to grind. There's nothing wrong with grinding it. It's wonderful to make sauces with and dressings. But hemp is amazing because hemp also has the perfect relationship that you want between omega-6s and omega-3s.
Don't walnuts have that too?
What?
Don't walnuts have that too?
Walnuts do, but not the perfect ratio. Hemp actually is the perfect ratio of 2:1 to 4:1. Actually, the ratio in hemp seeds is 3:1. Omega-6s to omega-3s. You always want a little bit more omega-6s, but if you look at the typical American diet, it's like 20:1. People are really not getting those omega-3s.
Right.
Which since all of those transitions from the linoleic acid and the alpha-linolenic acid down to their final product that we need to ingest, uses the same the same enzymes along the way, they compete with one another. So if you're taking in a lot of the omega-6s, especially with oils and processed food that have these oils, then that's what's going to be made preferentially, and you're not going to be making the DHA and EPA. And that's why Dr. Greger also recommends taking a source of preformed DHA or DHA/EPA, and that's from microalgae. And people talk about fish being so healthy, and fish might have one day been healthy in the past, but now, because of their omega-3 fatty acids, but they also have a lot of fat, including saturated fat, and they really hold a lot of toxins in their flesh. Right now, I think some of the fish have more microplastics in them than ever before, and they certainly have mercury and heavy metals and other. If you get a farmed fish, you're going to have high PCBs and dioxins, and these are carcinogens. So there's absolutely no reason to be dredging up the ocean. And if everyone's ever seen what some of these huge nets, these trawlers do,
they're awful.
Right, they just drag up from the bottom of the ocean everything in its path. So you don't need to eat the fish to get the DHA and EPA. They make it because they eat plants. So you can get DHA or DHA with EPA from algae, from sterilely grown microalgae, and that's what I would recommend, 250 to 300 milligrams a day. And that is very important also when you're developing a baby inside of you and when you're going to be breastfeeding, because it's important for the baby's brain development, and you want your breast milk to be very high in omega-3s. Right. So walnuts, we always recommend a tablespoon of walnuts, which isn't too many walnuts actually. And
it's like 1 or 2,
Right. Chia seeds, hemp seeds, flax seeds. And if you're quite obese or overweight and you're really watching your weight and you want to be careful with the nuts and seeds, and I totally get that, then you just stick to your tablespoon of a handful of walnuts, or a tablespoon or 2 of seeds a day, and that would be good. But I would just add the extra DHA and EPA, because we can't always be perfect, and we're often having foods with some oils, and we might be getting higher in the omega-6s. So just to keep that ratio, and that's something that can be measured. Absolutely. Right? You can get a blood test that'll show you what your ratio is.
Well, the next group that we want to talk about is antioxidants, because the bottom line is, eat from the rainbow, because the more colorful the fruits and vegetables, such as oranges or berries or even dark chocolate, because life would not be worth living without chocolate, just saying, but spinach, beets, things like that, these are very, very high in antioxidants. And that's what's going to help to clear out these free radicals that are roaming around in your body that are causing a lot of destructive damage. So antioxidant-rich foods, that are high in phytonutrients, definitely you want to make sure that you're eating from the rainbow as much as physically possible, every day, all day.
Exactly. And there's actually a wonderful table. You can look up antioxidants in food, and there's actually a wonderful table online, so you can see all the foods. They're listed for thousands of different foods, including spices. And spices are some of the highest antioxidant rich foods that there are, like things like amla, Indian gooseberry, AMLA.
It stinks though. I'm sorry.
You can put a little bit on your cereal. You'll never notice it.
I put it in my smoothie.
Right, exactly. So, but we were just talking, cinnamon and nutmeg and cloves are extremely high, and berries. And so look at that. But I'll tell you, you can't go wrong with any colorful food. And actually, I don't want to disparage the white vegetables because they're also high in antioxidants. So things like cauliflower and mushrooms, mushrooms have their own micronutrients, and those are also very important. Mushrooms should be cooked, but definitely they have their own micronutrients, and cauliflower too. So there are phytonutrients like sulforaphane in cruciferous vegetables, including in broccoli, and broccoli sprouts are extremely high in sulforaphane, and this helps your liver to detox. It increases the phase 2 enzymes in your liver. So eat from all the colors of the rainbow, including black, brown, white, every color of the rainbow, all the time. And actually, what's interesting about black, there's white rice, and there's brown rice, and there's black rice, and there's red rice, and they're all excellent. And so you should, except in that case, I would say white rice is probably the least important to eat, because they take away the bran and they've taken away the germs. So all you're left with is the starch. So more color. So whenever you have a chance to buy something with more color, like even when you're looking for quinoa, there's red quinoa and there's black quinoa. So and even when you're getting flax seeds, you can get golden flax, but you can also get a darker flax. So always think that color is good.
Yeah.
In life and in plants.
Exactly. Absolutely.
Yes.
One thing that we want to make sure is that, and I call this like peeling back layers of an onion, because you really need to start to learn about yourself. Like one of the things I learned about myself is that I cannot have salt in any way, shape, or form. In food, you know, in the cooking process or salting it, I can't add it. And if I have processed foods or eat out at a restaurant, I will pay for it. But it's kind of like a journey, you know, that you're learning about this. So you need to pay attention to certain foods and how your body responds, you know, because sometimes we don't think of the cause and effect because it happens 6 hours later or 8 hours or 10 hours later. And you're not really thinking of the cause and effect between what you just ate, you know, 5 or 6, 10 hours ago and how you're feeling now. So there may be foods that you may have symptoms and might be triggers for you. So it's good to know what those things are. So, you know, you might be somebody who's allergic to nightshades, you know, and you respond very badly to nightshades. Okay, fine. So you know, you learn that about yourself and you don't eat nightshades. It's pretty simple. Or if you have a gluten intolerance, then you don't eat foods with gluten in it. And so, you know, that's what a lot of our program is about, is teaching you how to do those things.
Turns out that actually seaweed can help with the pain of endometriosis. So you know those nori snacks that you can buy? Sometimes they have too much oil. Even I find them a little oily, but they really are delicious. But you can actually make your own nori snacks by taking sheets of nori and seasoning them with any kind of spices that you like, and then putting them under the in the oven and just to crisp them up. And that would be that has been shown to help with the pain of endometriosis. And my last story, I would like to just say that for many, many years, I would say for about 30 years or more, I had an incredible intolerance to the allium family. I could not eat onions, chives, leeks, green onions at all, at all. I mean, they were accidents. It was bad. It was, you know, TMI, it was very, very bad. And every time I went to conferences as I became vegan, and I talked to other doctors at the conferences, and I asked them, am I ever going to be able to get better from this? I asked about fasting. I asked about, you know, plant-based diets in general. Would this ever help? And everyone said, no, it's your enzymes, it's your pancreas, it's pancreatic enzymes, and this is going to be your life. And it was very hard on my relationship because my wife loved onions. And of course, even when I was vegetarian, I mean, this developed in medical school, which is interesting. It developed under the stress in medical school. Before that, I was enjoying onions. It wasn't my whole life, but it runs in my family also. Sisters and brothers, they can't do it either. I'm just going to say that after about 5 years of being plant-based, and I really was plant-based. I was giving up, not just vegan, I gave up the diet cola. We went organic. I stopped having, you know, inorganic vegetables. All of a sudden, and it really probably was all of a sudden, I could eat onions. And now I can eat onions without any problems. It
That's
is
awesome.
amazing. Yes. And nobody thought it was possible. I mean, I asked even Dr. Clapper. I mean, he didn't, I should tell him that. But nobody thought it was possible, but it is possible. So incredible things can happen when you take this seriously and you jump in 100%. It's not like, well, I'll try to have vegan a couple of days a week. I don't think that's going to do it.
Yeah.
Not if you're trying to reverse a disease. So if you really want to get well, then you want to do this 100%. Give it a try. Give it a month or two, you know, just go for it.
You don't have to do it for your whole life. Just try it for a month or two. You're right. Dive in.
You don't want to do it for your whole life.
Well, hopefully you'll feel so good that you want to.
That's the secret.
That's a secret. Shh.
That's the secret.
Anyway, next week's topic is going to be on menstrual irregularities. That's always such a tough thing. And I know growing up that a lot of my girlfriends had problems with that. So we're going to dive deep into that. So Dr. Shapiro, always a pleasure.
Thank you. And a pleasure here. And if anyone has any comments, please comment below.
And we'll see you next week.
Bye.